History is filled with legends, giants who changed the course of civilization. Today we explore the life of one such giant, a man whose name is etched in eternity. This is the story of Alexander the Great, the undefeated conqueror, the pupil of Aristotle, the master of warfare, and the founder of over 20 cities that bore his name. Yet, despite his fame, his final resting place remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Join us as we embark on the journey of Alexander the Great, his remarkable campaign and mysteries surrounding his death. After the Persian invasion and the long-lasting Peloponnesian War, both Greek city-states Sparta and Athens were exhausted. In that time, the new superpower started forming to the north. Macedonia, overlooked for most of the time, but now was their time to shine in these desperate times. Under the command of King Philip II, Macedonia emerged as unstoppable military force. The main reason was introduction of sarissa phalanx, close formation with highly trained pikemen. The sarissa, or sarissa, was a long spear or pike about 5 to 7 meters, 16 to 23 feet in length. It was introduced by Philip II of Macedon, and was used in his Macedonian phalanxes as a replacement for the earlier dory, which was considerably shorter. These longer spears improved the strength of the phalanx by extending the rows of overlapping weapons projecting towards the enemy. After the conquests of Alexander the Great, the sarissa was a mainstay during the Hellenistic era. In 338 BC, Philip defeated Theban and Athenian army at the Battle of Chaeronea, and established Hellenic League, commanding all Greek nations besides Sparta. Its goal was to make war on the Persian Achaemenid Empire to avenge the Second Persian invasion of Greece in 480 BC. He managed to convince the other Greek states to elect him as the leader of the League and started preparing for the war. After that, Philip started to plan a grand campaign to conquer the Persian Empire, but he was murdered by his guard before he could begin his military campaign. Fortunately, he had 2 sons. One of them was none other than Alexander III. Alexander was born in 356 BCE in the city of Pella, the capital of Macedonia. His mother, Queen Olympias, was a fiercely ambitious woman, deeply spiritual, and a believer in divine destiny. She often told Alexander that he was not just the son of Philip, but of Zeus himself, a belief that fueled his sense of greatness. From a young age, Alexander displayed intelligence, ambition, and an unbreakable will. His father saw in him the makings of a great ruler, but it was his mother who instilled in him a belief in his divine right to rule the world. When he was 13, Philip hired the greatest mind of the time, the philosopher Aristotle, to be his tutor. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander studied science, philosophy, medicine, and literature. He became fascinated by Homer's Iliad and saw himself as a new Achilles, destined for greatness. One of the most famous tales of Alexander's youth was the taming of the mighty horse, Bucephalus. The stallion was wild, feared by many, and uncontrollable. Yet Alexander, noticing that the horse was afraid of its own shadow, turned it toward the sun and calmed it. He rode the beast, earning the admiration of his father. At just 20 years old, Alexander's world changed forever. In 336 BCE, his father Philip was assassinated. Some suspected Olympias' involvement, but history remains uncertain. With Philip dead, Alexander ascended the throne of Macedonia. He swiftly eliminated rivals and secured his power. He was now king, but his ambition was far greater than ruling Macedonia alone. He set his sights on the Persian Empire. Before embarking on his conquest of Persia, Alexander secured his rule in Greece and Macedonia. He reinforced his father's military reforms, strengthening the phalanx formation and expanding the use of cavalry. He also established political stability by suppressing revolts, most notably in Thebes, which he destroyed as a warning to others. Additionally, he solidified alliances through diplomacy, ensuring that the Greek city-states, despite their historical rivalries, would follow him against Persia. In 334 BCE, a 22-year-old king made a move that would change the world forever. Alexander of Macedon crossed the Hellespont, the narrow strait dividing Europe and Asia, with an army of 40,000 men. Behind him lay Greece. Ahead, the vast Persian Empire. He wasn't just marching into foreign land. He was stepping into history. His first challenge came quickly. At the Granicus River, the Persian satraps had gathered a large force, waiting on the far bank, confident, well-positioned, and ready. Alexander's army was outnumbered, and the Persians held the high ground, but retreat wasn't in his nature. Without hesitation, Alexander led a direct cavalry charge right into the enemy's front lines. A reckless, audacious move few generals would dare. Clad in shining armor, plume whipping in the wind, he was the first to cross, cutting down enemies with his ziston, a long cavalry spear. The Persians faltered. Their formation broke. The river turned red. By nightfall, the field belonged to Alexander. The Battle of the Granicus wasn't just a victory. It was a message to the world. The boy king had arrived, and the conquest of Persia had begun. After Alexander's victory at the Granicus River, he turned south along the coast. Miletus had already begun to waver. Some factions wanted to surrender to Alexander, others remained loyal to Persia. The Persian navy, still strong in the Aegean, had hoped to use Miletus as a staging ground, but Alexander acted quickly and decisively. He blocked the harbor, cutting off the city from Persian sea support using a combination of land forces and allied Greek ships, particularly those from Rhodes. Alexander quickly conquered a port of Miletus and continued his campaign towards first clash with King Darius III. In the year 333 BCE, on the banks of the narrow river Isis, in what is now southern Turkey, the fate of empires was about to be decided. King Darius III, ruler of the mighty Persian Empire, had one goal: to crush the rising threat of the young Macedonian king, Alexander. With a force nearly 120,000 strong, Darius set out to hunt down his prey, but he had no idea that he was walking into a trap. Alexander, leading just 40,000 men, was marching south along the coast when news arrived. Darius had slipped behind him, cutting off his route of retreat. For many, this would mean panic. For Alexander, it meant opportunity. Without hesitation, he turned his army around and marched straight toward the enemy. The battlefield was narrow, wedged between mountains and sea, perfect for neutralizing the Persian numerical advantage. Darius took position in the center, surrounded by a sea of infantry and cavalry. Alexander, always leading from the front, took command of the right wing, placing his trusted general Parmenion on the left. The battle erupted with fury. The Persians launched a massive assault on the Macedonian left, trying to overwhelm Parmenion's forces. The fight was brutal. But while one flank struggled to hold the line, Alexander struck like lightning. He led his elite companion cavalry straight into the Persian center, aiming directly for Darius himself. In a bold, fearless charge, he smashed through the enemy ranks. As he approached the royal chariot, Darius panicked. Overwhelmed and stunned by the speed of the attack, the great king turned and fled the battlefield. It was over. With their king in retreat, Persian morale collapsed. Their formations crumbled. From both flanks, Alexander and Parmenion squeezed them in a deadly pincer. What followed was not a battle, but a slaughter. The Battle of Isis wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. It proved Alexander's brilliance, his audacity, and his unmatched command in the chaos of war. And Darius? After fleeing in disgrace, he would never truly recover his authority, nor his empire. After the crushing victory at Isis and the flight of King Darius III, Alexander stood at a crossroads. He could pursue the defeated Persian king and try to bring an end to the empire in one bold stroke. But instead, he made a strategic decision. He knew he couldn't risk an attack from the rear, not while the Persian navy still ruled the seas, so he turned south, to Phoenicia, Syria, and Egypt. Every port, every coastal stronghold had to fall. This wasn't just about territory, it was about stripping Persia of its naval power. The greatest challenge was the fortified island city of Tyre, a Phoenician stronghold built just off the coast, protected by walls rising from the sea. The city refused to surrender, so Alexander chose to do the impossible. He ordered the construction of a massive causeway, stretching from the mainland to the island. It was a feat of engineering and willpower. For 7 brutal months his men labored under constant attack. The defenders bombarded them from ships and towers. But slowly, stone by stone, the causeway advanced. When it reached the walls, Alexander brought forward siege towers and catapults. The final assault was fierce, thousands died. But Tyre fell, and with it, the last major Persian naval base was destroyed. With the eastern Mediterranean secure, Alexander marched into Egypt. There, he was welcomed as a liberator. The Egyptians, long under Persian rule, saw him as a hero. He visited the oracle at the Siwa oasis, where priests declared him the son of a god, a prophecy that would shape his destiny and self-image forever. On the Mediterranean coast, he founded a city that would carry his name through the ages, Alexandria, a beacon of Hellenistic culture, learning and trade. But Alexander wasn't done. Egypt was only a chapter. His true goal still lay ahead, to strike the heart of the empire and bring Persia to its knees. On the dry plains near Gaugamela, the stage was set for the greatest battle of Alexander's campaign. Alexander, leading only 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry, again heavily outnumbered, believed in his fate. Opposing him stood an unimaginable force raised for only one purpose: to destroy Alexander and his army. Over 150,000 men under King Darius III, supported by deadly war chariots, with scythed wheels, and even war elephants. King Darius gathered all the power he could, and Persia and all of Asia waited for the outcome. Darius had chosen the battlefield with care, a wide, flat plain ideal for his cavalry, chariots, and mass formations. He even ordered the ground leveled to ensure his chariots could charge without obstacle. His plan was simple: to crush the Macedonians with sheer power and numbers. But Alexander responded with brilliant strategy. He arranged his army in a slanted formation, placing his elite cavalry on the right flank, led by himself. The left flank he entrusted to the seasoned General Parmenion. In the center stood the formidable Macedonian phalanx, their long sarissas forming a forest of spears. Light infantry and archers guarded the flanks, ready to respond to any threat. The battle began. Darius sent forth a wave of chariots, thundering across the plain with a roar. But Alexander was prepared. His soldiers opened their ranks, creating corridors, and showered the chariots with javelins and arrows. Many were stopped before they could strike. Then came the pivotal moment. Alexander, from his position on the right, spotted a weakness in the Persian line, a gap between units. Without hesitation, he charged forward at the head of his cavalry, driving straight toward Darius himself. The heart of the Persian army was pierced. Darius, just as he had it, Ishus, panicked. Seeing the Macedonians closing in, he fled the field once more. His retreat broke the spirit of his men. But the battle was not yet over. On the left flank, Parmenian's forces were under immense pressure. Alexander had to tear part of his cavalry away from the pursuit and rush to their aid. Still, the battle was already won. The Persian army crumbled, leaving thousands dead behind, and their king's royal chariot abandoned. Gaugamela was not just a battle, it was the fall of an empire. With this victory, Alexander became the de facto ruler of the Persian Empire. Babylon, Susa, and eventually even Persepolis fell without significant resistance. Darius was on the run, and Alexander now ruled nearly the entire known world. Shortly after the battle, Alexander marched toward Babylon, one of the most important cities of the ancient world. He expected resistance, but instead the city's elite welcomed him with open arms. Babylon surrendered without a fight. The local governor, Macedonia, was allowed to remain in his position, an act that showed Alexander's desire to rule as a legitimate successor of the Persian kings rather than as a conqueror. After Babylon came Susa, another royal capital, where Alexander seized a massive treasure hoard. According to ancient records, it amounted to more than 50,000 talents, the equivalent of hundreds of tons of gold and silver. This wealth secured the funding for the continuation of his campaign. The next target was Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire and the seat of King Darius's palaces. But to reach it, Alexander had to pass through the formidable Zagros Mountains, where the Persian general, Ariobarzanes, attempted to block his advance at a narrow pass known as the Persian Gate. A direct assault was impossible, but Alexander discovered a mountain path, and, during the night, led his elite troops around the Persian defenses. At dawn, he launched a surprise attack from the rear and broke through the pass. Persepolis fell. Then came one of the most controversial acts of his reign, the burning of the royal palace in Persepolis. Some historians claim it was an act of revenge for the Persian sack of Athens during the Greco-Persian Wars. Others suggest it was a drunken impulse during a night of revelry. Whatever the reason, the blazing fire over Persepolis marked the symbolic end of an era. Darius III fled east, into Media and Bactria, hoping to gather new forces. But Alexander relentlessly pursued him, determined to capture or kill the man still considered the legitimate ruler of Persia. Darius, however, was betrayed by his own men. Bessos, satrap of Bactria, seized and soon murdered him, hoping to claim power for himself. When Alexander found Darius's body, he gave him a royal burial and swore vengeance. Bessos was later captured, tried, and executed as a traitor. After defeating Bessos, Alexander seemed to have conquered Persia, but new challenges awaited in Bactria and Sogdiana. Local tribes resisted fiercely, led by the guerrilla strategist Spidomenes. Alexander adapted, fighting a brutal campaign until Spidomenes was betrayed and killed. To unite cultures, Alexander married Roxana, a local noblewoman. Then, in 327 BCE, he marched into India. Crossing the deadly Hindu Kush, he lost many soldiers to the cold and exhaustion. Despite growing resistance and the fatigue of his men, Alexander pressed forward, chasing not just victory, but immortality. On the banks of the river Hydaspes, today's Jhelum in Pakistan, Alexander the Great came face to face with a new opponent, King Porus. He was no mere Persian satrap, but a proud and capable ruler, with a massive army and war elephants at his command. The battle that followed in 326 BCE became one of the most difficult and awe-inspiring of Alexander's entire campaign. He entered it against an enemy who refused to bow, even if it meant dying with a sword in hand. The Hydaspes River served as a perfect, natural defense. Porus positioned his army on the far bank and awaited a direct attack. But Alexander employed a clever ruse. While part of his forces visibly remained at the camp opposite the Indian army, he secretly led his main troops downstream during the night, under the cover of rain and storm, and launched a surprise attack from the flank. When the battle erupted, it was a clash of two completely different worlds. Porus's war elephants wreaked havoc among the Macedonian ranks, tearing through formations, crushing shields and men alike. But Alexander's discipline and tactical brilliance turned the tide. His cavalry outflanked the Indian wings, the infantry held the line, and at last, after a long and brutal fight, Porus's army collapsed. Porus fought to the very end. Gravely wounded and surrounded, he refused to surrender. When Alexander finally captured him, he asked how he wished to be treated. Porus answered with a single sentence, "Like a king." Alexander, impressed by his courage, let him keep his rule. Now, as an ally of Macedonia, the Battle of the Hydaspes was Alexander's last great victory. But his army was exhausted. His soldiers no longer wished to march further east. And so, instead of pressing into the heart of India, Alexander turned back, toward home. But even a victorious return would come at a cost. After the victory over Porus, Alexander found himself at the height of his glory, a conqueror who had surpassed the boundaries of the known world. But while his name grew stronger, his army grew weaker. After years of relentless warfare, thousands of miles of marches and bloody battles, his soldiers refused to go any further. At the banks of the Hyphasis River, they mutinied, not with weapons, but with tears in their eyes. They wanted to go home. And Alexander, though reluctantly, gave in. But the journey back was no triumph. It was torment. Instead of taking the familiar route, Alexander chose a path through the Gedrosian Desert, a wasteland without water, food, or mercy. Thousands of his men perished from hunger and exhaustion. It was a march through death, and many hated him for it. Upon returning to Persia, a darker chapter of his reign began. Alexander was no longer just a general. He was the ruler of an empire, and he began to change. He adopted Persian customs, declared himself a god, and his vision of uniting East and West was met with growing resistance. The Macedonians grumbled. The courtiers whispered. Betrayal came from within. The most painful was that of his close friend and commander, Philotas. When he was accused of conspiracy, Alexander did not hesitate. Philotas was executed. Shortly after, he had his father, Parmenion, one of his most loyal generals, murdered as well. Fear and paranoia began to rule as much as he did. His relationships with friends began to crumble. At a fateful banquet, after a drunken quarrel, Alexander, in a fit of rage, stabbed his companion Clitus to death, the very man who had once saved his life. It was a moment he would never forget, and one that haunted him until the end. In 323 BC, after returning to Babylon, Alexander fell ill, fevers, pain, weakness. Days passed, and his condition worsened. Poisoning? Perhaps. Or simply a body broken by years of war, alcohol, and stress. For 10 days he fought the illness, and then he died. At just 32 years old, his death shattered the empire he had so fiercely built. He left no clear heir, only a legend. And that legend, the glory and the power, was torn apart by his generals. After Alexander's death in Babylon in 323 BCE, a struggle broke out over his empire and over his body. It was meant to be taken back to Macedonia, but it never made it home. One of his generals, Ptolemy, stole it and brought it to Egypt. At first, he buried Alexander in Memphis, later moving the tomb to Alexandria, the city Alexander himself had founded. His tomb became a place of pilgrimage for the powerful. Caesar, Augustus, and other emperors visited it. Then it vanished, and with it, the body of the great conqueror. But his legend remained immortal, even though his tomb was lost forever.